for trade ties between them will really hinge on whether or not those terms have been effective. Now, the Singapore equity session is looking fairly depressed today. The benchmark here, the STI, is downstream by nearly 1 to 0.2%. But it's Singtel, the shares of Singtel that have been in focus today. The telco giant reported shrinking profits from the shock of COVID-19, and for their financial year ended March the 31st, net profit declined 49% to 554 million Singapore dollars. That compares with the year before. There were net exceptional charges of close to 1.2 billion Singapore dollars for the full year. Those were factored in, of course, and they include non-cash impairment charges for the investments that were made in their subsidiaries in the United States, Amobee and Trustwave. Now, Singtel's operating revenue was also down 5% on year. So for this financial year, the board is recommending a final ordinary dividend per share of 2.4 cents, and that brings the total amount of the ordinary dividends per share for the year to 7.5 cents. Singtel CEO says these disappointing results were mainly caused by disruptions from the pandemic and continuing structural challenges, but their subsidiary NCS, together with data center services, proved their bright spots, showing strong growth as enterprises were rushing to digitalize and transform their businesses. Singtel has begun a strategic review of some of their failing businesses, but looking ahead, they want to invest more in 5G and to expand their market share in Singapore and in Australia. For the broader region, though, investor sentiment has been dampened by concerns that central banks in this region might be closer to dialing back their emergency stimulus measures, with the global economy slowly showing signs of recovery. In South Korea, the central bank today upgraded its growth and inflation outlook whilst keeping their rates steady once again. Now, the analysts say a change in monetary policy could be on the cards, though, for South Korea. The Kospi is downstream by nearly 0.7%. Very cautious trade as well seen in Tokyo, with the Nikkei 225 dragging by also nearly 0.7%. Now, global energy giants suffered a big blow from climate activists and disgruntled shareholders over their efforts to reduce carbon emissions. The company boards at Exxon and Chevron both caved to dissident shareholders. Royal Dutch Shell also lost a landmark case. In the United States, Exxon shareholders defied the management to elect at least 2 new board members that were proposed by the activist hedge fund Engine Number One, and that holds a stake in Exxon worth about $50 million, compared with the market capitalization of Exxon of about $250 billion. Over at Chevron, the shareholders voted 61% in favor of a resolution calling for the company to cut its carbon emissions. The company does say they will carefully consider that result. Now, the success of climate activists has extended to the courtroom as well. In the Netherlands, green campaigners won a court battle in The Hague to force Shell to cut its carbon emissions by 45% over the next 10 years. And the court also ruled that Shell was responsible for all the emissions of its customers and suppliers. Coming back to the U.S. oil giant Chevron, though, they have backed that decision to suspend dividend payments to Myanmar's military in their joint venture. It's a gas transportation company where the military holds a minority stake. Now, that was earlier announced by the French energy partner Total that operates the pipeline that links the offshore gas field through Myanmar into Thailand. The suspension of those dividend payments is retrospectively effective from April the 1st. It's still not known how much all this might amount to, but the FT is quoting sources as saying it could be some $350 million for last year. Chevron also did back their partner's decision to stop new investments in this project. That's an important source of revenue for the Myanmar military. Both Chevron and Total have come under pressure to stem their funds to the military in Myanmar since the coup on February the 1st and the deadly continuing crackdown on civilian protesters. The companies have condemned all that violence and the human rights abuses taking place in Myanmar, but they say they will continue to produce gas from those fields so as not to disrupt the electricity supply in Myanmar and in Thailand. Together, Total and Chevron own more than 60% in that joint venture company. Thailand's PTT owns about a quarter of that stock, and Myanmar's state-owned oil and gas company, MOGE, controls the rest.
No one is representing Myanmar at what's arguably one of the most important gatherings in the WHO's history. The country has been excluded after the WHO was faced with the dilemma over who to recognize as Myanmar's legitimate representative. Both ousted civilian authorities and the military sent requests in for this year's gathering, which began on Monday. It will last through the 1st of June. Serious allegations are emerging against the military after an investigation by the Associated Press and the Human Rights Center Investigations Lab at the University of California, Berkeley. They allege the military is using bodies of victims as tools of terror. The report says videos and photographs recorded in various cities across Myanmar show bodies being hauled away by the army and police. The report cites more than 130 instances, which it alleges is aimed at creating anxiety, uncertainty and striking fear in the civilian population. The report alleges autopsies have been carried out without permission and that deaths were blamed on falls and heart attacks, which contradicts eyewitness accounts and images captured by protesters and journalists. A rights group says more than 825 people have been killed since the start of the coup. And still ahead on Asia now, Japan gets a show of support from the US about going ahead with the Tokyo Olympics. But the pandemic is not the only risk facing the Summer Games, with a new report revealing the effects the searing summer heat in Tokyo could have on athletes.
I'm getting my COVID-19 vaccine.
Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in.
And documenting all my side effects.
Bam, the soreness set in.
But with cases of infection among those who are vaccinated, how protected am I?
Now what we're seeing are actually mutants, which are quite different from the original strand.
Talking Point, Friday 9:30 p.m. on CNA.
It's a human catastrophe of epic proportions. Thousands are dying every day in India as it battles the raging coronavirus crisis.
हमारे सामने उन्होंने दम तोड़ा, हम कुछ नहीं कर पाए। मेरी वाइफ चली गई, मेरे दोनों ब्रदर इन लॉ गए और मदर इन लॉ एक्सपायर्ड हो गई।
Has India lost control of the pandemic?
If you step out right now, you step out to die.
India's COVID catastrophe. Insight tonight on CNA.
There's still apprehension on how the one country, two systems political system will continue to evolve. But it's the resilience of the people, holding on to their culture proudly and strong institutions, all help to make Hong Kong what it is today, and the hope of a better tomorrow. Roland Lim, CNA, Hong Kong.
A reminder of China's past, glorious, majestic, powerful, Its centuries-old history gives us an understanding of where China's future lies. The ambition to bring back the greatness of an ancient superpower is palpable. I have a front row seat as China's new chapter of history unfolds. It's exhilarating, and I'm not about to miss this moment in history.